I've had the G9 now for a couple of weeks, and in the beginning it was a difficult transition, and I find myself reaching for it more and more, so I thought I'd make a video about it. It became a natural progression to compare the G9 to my FujiFilm X-H1. As you know, I'm a massive fan of the FujiFilm system, and picking up a Micro Four Thirds camera for the first time, specifically this one, the G9, was a very close comparison to my X-H1. So here we go. So ergonomics and usability. I like having the Canon style, if I'm allowed to use Canon in the same sentence as Fujifilm. I like having those dials on my Fujifilm X-H1, and we'll show you some B-roll of that now. On the front, I control my ISO. On the back, I control my shutter, and then aperture on Fujifilm is controlled on the lens. So I like having those three controls at my disposal at all times. On this, you need to set the camera a little bit. So what I saw someone do online is they use this one for something, this one for another thing, and this dial on the back for another. But straight out, the default setting is you've got to press an ISO button, and then you can change the ISO setting. So for me, that was a bit frustrating, but there is a workaround. Also, a huge thing, and so immediately the Lumix starts to get ahead of the X-H1, is this touch screen. It's phenomenal. So anything that you can't do with the massively customizable body, you can do on screen. It's comparative to Canon screens, it's very responsive, and it flips out. The screen on the slightly older Lumix G9 is way better than my X-H1. My X-H1 has some touch capabilities, but this is fully touch integrated. It feels far more like, I always compare everything to my old Canon. It's far more like a Canon style touch user interface, just really, really good. Both cameras have lovely ergonomics in terms of just holding the camera, where the buttons are in relation to your fingers. Everything is where you would want it to be as soon as you get used to each camera. I would have to give the winning marks to the Lumix on this. The grip itself is just slightly bigger, it's more comfy. I think there's more buttons on this body. It's just a very comfy place to be holding this camera. The only thing I would say that the Fujifilm has over the Lumix is that it's a slightly better looking camera. It's a prettier camera. Video features. The Fujifilm was always slammed as having lackluster video features. It's never really bothered me. I love the Fujifilm's video features, but definitely the G9 also shoots ahead of the X-H1 in this department. So the G9 has an assisted shooting mode where you can add a Rec 709 LUT to your vlog, which allows you to see your contrast and saturation and all that a little bit better, which the Fujifilm doesn't have. Also, the Fujifilm doesn't have zebras. Zebras are those little lines that go across when your highlights are peaking. That's very strange and almost unacceptable for a video camera. That really upset a lot of the reviewers when they first tried the Fujifilm X-H1, and I thought they'd quickly fix that in a firmware update, and they never did. So for a video-centric camera not to have zebras, it's almost just completely ridiculous. That being said, I almost never use F-Log on my Fujifilm. I have found that if I shoot in Eterna at 400% dynamic range, I get really good results. I actually think I'm getting better dynamic range on the Fujifilm in Eterna by turning the dynamic range setting to 400% than shooting in F-Log. So the F-Log versus V-Log maybe isn't such a huge issue. This also adds to my workflow on the Fujifilm. It's just a faster workflow. I don't have to color grade as much. I very often slap a LUT on one of my favorite LUTs and I'm pretty much good to go. In terms of codecs and video settings on the Fujifilm, it's far more straightforward. You get 1080p. I think it maxes out at 100 megabits per second at 60 frames per second. You get 4K, you also get 4K DCI, and the 4K maxes out at 200 megabits per second, but you only get maximum of 30 frames per second in 4K. Another sort of secret weapon on the Fujifilm is its 120 frames per second. It's just a beautiful image. It's 100 megabits per second, but they somehow, I think, stretch that quite nicely over the 120 frames per second. On the other hand, the Lumix does MOV, MP4, MP4 HEVC, and an AVC HD, which is a certain type of codec. What that means is Lumix really go out of their way to give you as many options as possible in the codec department, which gives you a lot of frame rate options, which gives you a lot of bitrate options. And that's kind of the hallmark of this whole comparison, is that the Lumix just gives you a world of options. The other huge thing about the G9 since its firmware updates at the end of 2019 is that it now does 10 bits in 4K. That is phenomenal. This camera went from just being a photography camera to being a competitor to their own GH5, which is just great. So this is a baby GH5. You get Vlog at an extra expense and you get 10-bit 4K, just mind-blowing. That being said, if we're all honest, most content creators on YouTube and even people making video in the community, very people actually know what they're doing with color grading. And so 10 bits is a nice feature to grow into. And also 10 bits isn't very manageable on most computer systems. You need quite a high-end computer to manage that codec. Another nice thing about the Lumix is that it has this beautiful light scope. If you see it and you've done some exposure compensation in Final Cut Pro or Premiere Pro, it'll look familiar to you. With a little bit of practice, you can actually start recognizing highlights and shadows and actual things in the image by this light scope, and it's very handy to shoot video with. That combined with your zebras in Vlog, it's a great way to shoot. You're getting a lot of control, and it's a super pro feature to have on such a compact camera. Also, something to note with the Lumix is that when shooting in 10 bits, you can shoot in HLG, which is a pro feature that I know nothing about, so let's ask Google. Okay Google, what is HLG?
According to Wikipedia, Hybrid Log Gamma, HLG, is a backwards compatible high dynamic range standard that was jointly developed by the BBC and NHK.
So that doesn't give you much information at all. But yeah, it's a basic broadcast standard that was developed by the BBC and a few other people, and a lot of people seem to like it. Gerald Undone seems to like it, so it must be good. Okay, so we have to speak about the flip-out screen. Now, to the anti-flip-out screen people out there, I mean, I was one of them when I heard that the X-T4, the Fujifilm X-T4 was coming out with a screen like this. I was a bit of a grumpy guts because I switched from Canon, got used to the screen on my XH1, and then they went and switched to the Canon style. But using this for a couple of shoots now, this is just, like, I understand now why content creators on YouTube just say, this is a better way to do a screen. Why have people not been doing this? I see the new vlogging camera from Sony is also just kind of, they've just submitted to the Canon way of doing screens. It is the best way of making a screen. The reason I say that is I was on a shoot and I had this camera on a tripod, I had my XH1 on a gimbal, and I needed to monitor what was going on the tripod camera at all times. So no matter where I was, behind the camera, in front of the camera, standing over there, I could always see what was going on with the Lumix. So flip out screen, it just wins, man. Like, you can say it isn't, but it is. And even for photography, a lot of photographers say that it is the best way to do a screen. Shoot me. And if you're not convinced, here is a little clip of me setting up a shot on my own with my XH1. And you will see that it is just an absolute pain in the ass. Color science. Now this is completely subjective. This isn't sort of a hands down win. I mean, I know this is gonna upset a few people, but personally I really just feel like if this was a comparison between a Sony and the Fuji would just win hands down, or like a Canon and a Sony, or a Panasonic and a Sony, or an Olympus and a Sony. No, but seriously though, the color is very subjective. And the nice thing about Fuji is that the color comes out the camera beautiful. The color is great here. I mean, watch Cody Warner's 1 year of vlogging. He did 365 days everyday vlogging, and he used the Lumix GH5 to vlog with because it's got the flip out screen. He used a manual lens, and I'm sure he used just a normal color profile on the camera. And very often I watched his vlogs and thought, man, the color is stunning. So the color on these two cameras, they are good, but I would just have to give the out-of-body color to Fuji. It just is lovely. Also, like I mentioned, a lot of people don't really know what they're doing with color grading, including myself. I'm learning every single day. It is a very complicated process. So to have a camera as a semi-pro that already has good color is a huge win for me. Whereas I do find with the Panasonic, I've got to work a little harder. That being said, Vlog on this camera is just exceptional. Compared to F-Log, I'm almost starting to think F-Log isn't a proper log profile compared to Vlog. It just is, it really is that good. And that is why Panasonic are charging $100 for you to enable Vlog on their cameras, because I think they know that it is one of the best. And so, as I mentioned, with all the other features, working with Vlog is just an absolute pleasure in this camera. To color grade it is lovely. There are a lot of LUTs, Rec 709 LUTs, and then you can put a look LUT on top of that, or do your own look color grade. There are a lot of options. And even though the bitrate on the Panasonic isn't as high as my Fuji, somehow it holds up. So I don't know what they do there. I think it has something to do with the types of codecs they use. Either that's a whole area that I'm looking into and learning about, but it really does hold its own, and Vlog is exceptional. And the next thing I want to talk about is the dynamic range of these cameras. Theoretically, every camera should have better dynamic range when you're shooting in log. But I haven't found that with the Fuji. I'm really starting to find that they're the same, if not better, in Eterna on the FujiFilm. But I do sometimes shoot in F-Log. Anyway, here is a test. We're going to do 4K 200 megabits per second in F-Log, and then we're going to add the grade, remove the grade for the FujiFilm, and then alongside that we're going to do the Lumix. What you want to watch out for now as we show you that footage is look at the highlights and look at the shadows, and we'll try and enhance the image here and there because YouTube compression is not going to give you the best experience here. But you should see that the Lumix shooting in 10-bit 4K is probably going to give you a little bit more in the highlights and the shadows. So what that means is the Lumix is probably going to give you more of a pro cinematic look than the Fujifilm. If you don't understand what dynamic range is and you're just starting out in video, it's something that you're going to be chasing after more and more than background blur, more than color, more than anything else. You're going to start looking for that dynamic range because it is one of the secrets to getting that cinematic look. You know, like when I first started, guys were saying, well, put the black bars on and do this and do that, and all these sort of fake cinematic things. The thing that gives your video that cinematic look, and it's the reason why I'm so interested in the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, is because it gives you incredible dynamic range. And so what you want to look out for is detail in the highlights, detail in the shadows. To sum that up, to have that kind of control on the Lumix with the Vlog and the light scopes and the zebras, the 10 bits, the dynamic range, that is just so much pro-grade features of such a small camera. It's just mind-blowing. So, you know, that for me is a massive win if you are trying to decide on buying this or the Fujifilm. Lenses, again, the hallmark of this video is that the Lumix gives you more options and more just overall features. And lenses are the same because the Lumix gives you micro four thirds. So even though which I haven't really spoken about in this video because I don't think it's as big a deal as some people would think. It has a smaller sensor. So this has got a micro four thirds sensor, but what that does is the micro four thirds system is a universal system that a lot of people were using back in the day. So at the moment, I think it's only Olympus, Blackmagic still uses it, and Lumix, who still use the micro four thirds sensor, which gives you a lot of lens options. So you've got a lot of lens options, a lot to choose from. That also does complicate the issue a little bit. If you want a more simple, straightforward system, the Fujifilm is there for you. Wonderful lenses, sometimes a little bit sort of weird, like the lens on that camera that's filming from that angle is the 56mm f1.2. Beautiful lens, but the autofocus sucks, and I think my focus distance is 700mm, which is just ridiculous, but a great lens. So anyway, so some quirky lenses, but a very simple lineup, which, you know, is great for people who don't want to worry about trying to research the lens that is perfect for their Micro Four Thirds system. So what are the standout features? The Lumix was ahead of its time when it came out, with its flip screen, its beautiful touchscreen interface, the rugged body. You know, for a Micro Four Thirds system to come out as big as it is, this is not a small camera, it's a decent sized camera. It was ahead of its time. And now with the firmware update that came out late 2019, it is a video beast competing with its own cameras. And so what makes the Lumix stand out is its features. It just is packed with features, from codecs to light scopes to just having lots of customizable buttons, a beautiful flip out screen, many lenses to choose from. There's just lots of options with this camera. So what makes the XH1 stand out? The XH1 is firstly just a lovely camera. It's a beautiful camera, it's lovely to look at. It's a kind of camera you would keep and give to your kids. You know, it's a kind of thing that will stand the test of time. But that's not really a reason to buy a camera. The image coming out of the FujiFilm is just beautiful. So the onboard image straight out of camera, plug into your computer is just lovely. So for a lot of people, that is just a winning feature to have. Also, the slow motion is something that not a lot of people talk about with the FujiFilm, but the more I watch other videos, the slow motion is turning out to be one of their standout features. Also, the XH1 is a steal to buy. Well, the rumor is that the XH1 has actually been discontinued. So if you can get it new, it's a pretty good deal. And then there's a lot of secondhand deals as people sell it to get the XT4, the XT3. So there's a lot of good deals out there for the XH1, and it really is just a rugged, stunning camera. So which one is for you? I would say if you don't care how your camera looks, I mean, this is not a pretty camera, it's just a camera. If you don't care how your camera looks and you're just after features, this is a no-brainer. It's just packed with features, and also it gives you a very cinematic look. You've got to work for it, but it's there. If you really love having tech that looks and feels good and is just lovely to use, the FujiFilm is definitely for you. And that's it. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it useful. Please subscribe to the channel. Please let me know what you thought in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next one.